If you love stamping, but you're struggling with reverse stamping or layered stamping, this one's gonna be for you because we are using watercolors again. What's up, nail crew? It's Nicole, your fellow nail obsessed DIYer. That beautiful Manny you just saw, I tried an even easier way to use watercolors with a stamp. I'm gonna show you how simple it is and how quickly you can do it with little to no artistic ability. So, first, we're gonna jump into our dip mani. And I knew I wanted the colors of the watercolor to really pop with my mani, so I decided to go in with a milky white base. This one is called Those Who Can't Wed Plan. It's this gorgeous milky white from OG Dip Powder. The last time that I did watercolor with stamping, I used a light pink with flakes. So my suggestion after doing it twice would definitely be to go with a lighter color. That is going to allow your watercolor design to really pop. So if you're doing like a light purple, light yellow, light blue, white, pink, anything like that is going to really let the watercolors show up well. If you do a darker color, you're not going to be able to see the watercolors if you're doing that as your base. So I went in, I finished doing the 2 dips of my milky white and then topped with clear and activated it. So I didn't get any of the other shimmer or glitter that I'm going to use. I didn't get that mixed in with my ring finger. The shimmery blue that I'm dipping right now is called Splish Splash. And then the glitter that I'm going to use is called I'm Going to Touch the Butt. If you watched Finding Nemo, you know exactly what that reference is from. Every time I see that, it just makes me laugh. I love like when companies use really funny names for their dip powders. So I only have to do 2 dips of each of the dip powders because I keep builder gel on as a base on my natural nails. I pretty much have been doing that for the past like 3.5, almost 4 years. I am very rough in my hands. I like to change my dip manis as often as I feel like. Sometimes it's every 3 or 4 days. Sometimes it's like every week, week and a half. But having the builder gel on all the time just gives me the flexibility to do that. And I don't have to worry about my nails breaking in between manis because I just put peel base in between the dip powder and the builder gel. So I do 2 full dips all the way back to the back of my nail, covering my entire nail. And that's what I'm doing of the shimmery blue. It applied like a dream. If you're just starting out dipping your nails or you've been dipping for a couple months and you're really struggling, shimmers are the way to go and pouring them over. So I pour over shimmers and solids and then I lay my nail flat onto glitters, flakes, and foils. That allows me to have like the nicest, most even application, especially if I don't want my nails to be super thick, which I never do. It's better to have a higher number of thinner layers than a lower number of thicker layers. If you do thicker layers, your nails are going to be more prone to cracking, chipping, and lifting. So applying that dip base as thin as you can is the first step in getting your nice thin layers. And then pouring over your solids and shimmers allows them to just apply so much more even than when you dip your finger in. So dipping your finger in at a 45-degree angle, I've seen a lot of people recommend, but a lot of them have also been dipping for a long time, so they don't get a lot of lumps and bumps. They can easily dip their nails in without them getting super thick too. I still pour the powder over. I just like how it lays on my nails. And you could see when I was doing the shimmery blue, like you can see how thin the application and how even it is already. And now we're gonna get into applying a chunky glitter. This is my go-to tried and true method for applying chunky glitter. I pour it into a dip cup, and if you don't have one, you can use a cupcake liner. And then for the first dip, you want to just get the base of the color. So you don't want to pick up a lot of the chunky glitters because that's going to make your nail look thicker. So I did the very first layer, just picking up the main base. And then on the second layer, you saw me like maneuvering the glitters around, like shaking the cup up so that more of the chunky glitters come to the top. And that's what I want to pick up on my second dip. And you lay your nail flat for both of those dips. So on that second dip, that's where you're going to get more of the chunky glitters. And then I like to pour out some of the dip powder onto this little flexible plate. All these like nail accessory things are all from SJ3. I will make sure that I link everything in the description that I use. So I pour some of the glitter out onto this flexible plate and then use a wax tool to pick up the glitter pieces and lay them where I want. So I did add extra dip base down to my nails to make sure that the glitter has something to adhere to. And then that is all you you have to do to get your chunky glitter to look nice is to add those extra pieces wherever you missed them when you laid your nail flat for that second dip. I like to go through with either a little plastic baggie, or sometimes I do what I'm doing in this video. I take an orange wood stick and just kind of press the glitters down with the cuticle pusher end anywhere that they feel like they're popping up a little. And because the glitter sat so nicely, I really didn't need to do much of that. The last layer of dip that I like to do anytime I'm using dip liquids is top with clear dip powder. And I know this isn't something that everybody does, but I personally found that it works so well no matter what kind of dip powder you're using, a solid flake, foil, shimmer, glitter, whatever. It's going to protect your colors when you go to buff and shape. So you just did all this work to apply your dips so nicely, and then you would go and buff and potentially mess up your color. Okay, I do not want to do that after I just worked so hard. So clear is always my last layer, and I brush off the excess really well to still keep my nails nice and thin. Then you go through and you apply a nice amount of activator on your nails. So the activator is what hardens the dip powders, and that's what we need to be able to buff and shape. Once your nails are ready to buff and shape, you can go in and tap on them. And that's how you can tell, like if it makes a hard tapping noise, you know they're ready to file, buff, and shape. I like to take a flexible file like the one that I'm using, and that's what I use just to smooth out my nails to make sure there are no lumps and bumps. I really don't have to do a lot of buffing and shaping, because when you use a really good quality dip liquids and really good quality powders and do the pour over method, you really don't need to buff and shape much. I take an e-file to just go around the cuticle area to make sure my cuticle lines look nice and crisp. And once I'm done, I take isopropyl alcohol on a lint-free wipe and make sure that my hands are nice and clean. So now we're gonna get into the really fun stamping watercolor design. This is what you've been waiting for. And I decided to try doing it a little bit differently this time to see if it would work, because it is less steps for you to do. So before, when I did the watercolor, I did it over a base of matte nail polish. And I decided that I was gonna try it directly on my dip nails that have been buffed and shaped super smooth and then wiped with alcohol. So you wanna work pretty quickly to get the main stamped image down, because you don't have any kind of sticky base down on your nails. It is just the dip powder that's been activated and buffed and shaped super smooth. So if you work quickly, you do not need to have any sticky base down. You can pick whatever image you want to do your watercolor stamping, but I found that an image that's pretty open, like the flower pattern that I'm using, those work best when you're doing watercolor with stamping, because then your watercolor has somewhere to go. You can do a bunch of different colors in your design, and the watercolor will really show up on the little pattern of your stamp. So because the stamp that I'm using is a flower and it has all those open areas for the flower to be, then I have so much space left to color in. When you're doing the watercolor, all I used was a watercolor set off Amazon, which I will make sure I link that in the description too. I used the brush that came with it, and then I got this little bowl and put water in it. So when I first started doing the watercolor, what you want to do is you want to get your brush wet, and you don't want it to be like soaked. And what I try to do when I'm getting the first color down is I try to dip the brush in the water and then dip it onto whatever watercolor I'm using, because you need that to be a little bit wet. Now with this method, doing it directly on the dipped nails that are just buffed and shaped smooth, I found I need the watercolor paint to be a little bit drier. So it still has to be wet, but it can't be super wet or it doesn't show up on your nail. So you kind of have to play around a little bit with the watercolors on your nails and see how wet it actually needs to be. And when you switch colors, all you have to do is dunk the brush into the water and then wipe it on your paper towel. So I keep a paper towel there to always be able to change my colors. And I switched easily from the purple to the blue just by like dunking the brush in, wiping the paper towel a couple times, and then dunking the brush back in to put it onto the watercolor paint. So you kind of have to also play around with the different watercolors and how well they're showing up. So the first orange that I used, I felt like it probably wasn't going to show up well enough. So I quick switched to the orange beside it, and that showed up a lot better. Now, if you put your watercolor on and it's a little too dark, then you can take the thinner nail art brush that comes with it, very carefully dip it into the water, and just go right over the areas of your stamped image, of the watercolor that's in the stamped image that looks a little bit too too dark. So you can really play around with the colors, because once the stamped image is on and it's dried, it doesn't come up with using the watercolors, which is super cool that you can play around with it. And if you decide you don't like a color, you basically just take a little nail art brush, dip it in the water, and wipe that color off. When you're doing watercolors, it can be very similar to stamping in that you're trying to get your colors to coordinate with the ones on your mani. And you can also play around. So there was no green on my mani anywhere, but I felt like the flowers just needed a beautiful green touch for the leaves. I tried to go with a lighter green, but it just felt like too lime green. And then I did a darker green, but you'll see coming up here that I end up taking some water on that thinner nail art brush just to kind of make the green a little bit less stark. So you can play around with with the watercolor brush, and you can make the colors not look as stark, not as opaque. You can make them look a little bit more watercolory, or I don't know the official terminology, because I'm not an artist, I'm not a painter. For me, using the watercolors, what seems to pop really well is when you do black stamping polish as your base, because then the colors can really show up in between there. Once you are totally done with all your watercolors, they are where you want them to be, you want to let them dry for at least 5 to 10 minutes. So I pushed it with this one a little bit and was closer to the 5-minute mark, but they really only smeared a little tiny bit up at the top of the flower at the edge of my nail. I have to share this trick with you that I figured out about how to use dip liquids to top your stamping. So this works even if you're doing stamping with watercolors as well. You want to take some kind of smudge-free top coat, and once your stamp nail is dry, including a watercolor stamp, you want to apply the smudge-free top coat over it. So the reason that my nails probably smeared was because I did not let everything dry long enough. So the watercolors need to dry for about 10 minutes, and then the smudge-free top coat needs to dry for about 10 minutes as well. Then you can go in and do your top coating with your activator and dip liquids top coat just as you normally would. The key to getting the dip top coat to work really well over the smudge-free top coat is letting it dry. So be more patient than I am. I know it basically adds about an extra like 15 minutes onto your mani, but for me, I absolutely love dip top coat and I don't want to give it up. And I know a lot of you can't use gels, so I'm trying to do as many different ways to do nail art as possible without using any gels, and this one is so nice. I've tried it with 2 different brands of dip liquids now, and it worked equally as well on both. When you're using the dip liquids to top coat over this stamping and the smudge-free top coat, make sure that you float every single layer. So float the activator and the top coat. Now, if you're still struggling with stamping and you want to learn more of the basics, then check out this next video. Thanks for joining me today, Nail Crew.